I'm going to bring in a man who really needs no introduction, former KGO talk show host, presidential scholar, and just all around good guy. Here's John Rothmann, everybody. Hey. How you doing, John Rothmann?
Just great. I love the panel. It was wonderful. I wish everyone could hear it, and I hope that people listen to it, send it out to their friends, and subscribe to the Mark Thompson program.
Thank you very much. Let's start with your opinion on what happened in Colorado.
I agree. Donald Trump is an insurrectionist. Absolutely. No question about it. But I think he should not be barred from the ballot.
Why?
Why? Because the American people have a right to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And if he were knocked off the ballot, there would be a martyr complex about him. See, they were out to get me, and they did. Well, I say, let's put it to the people. I think it was very significant, very important that Joe Biden today said he was an insurrectionist. Of course he's an insurrectionist. Does anybody doubt it? And the Colorado court decision states it. And I think that when Mr. Smith's case comes before the court, it too will affirm the fact that Donald Trump tried to subvert the American election of 2020. So I hope he's on the ballot, and I hope he's roundly defeated. Don't make him a martyr. That's my point.
Don't you think, though, that there's a reason that the 14th Amendment and that clause is included in the Constitution, and that we have these laws to protect our democracy? Here we have a democracy at risk from someone who clearly tried to damage it. So
no, he didn't try to damage it. He tried to overthrow it.
Yeah, tried to
dismantle it. Let's get a court conviction. Let's get a criminal case against Donald Trump where he is convicted in a court. That's the way it has to be resolved. It cannot be resolved by taking him off the ballot. It'll only hurt the process of American democracy.
The Constitution protects our democracy. So if we're not going to use it to protect our democracy, then what's the point?
Kim, January 6th proved it's one thing to have words, but you have to have deeds. The January 6th report sums it up. Donald Trump tried to subvert American democracy. Let the courts rule that way. But if you take him off the ballot, millions of Americans who support him and people like me who oppose him will say that's not the way you do it. He has to be repudiated by the American people. If he isn't repudiated by the American people, then he will always claim fraud. They were out to get me, all that stuff. So I agree with the court's bottom line that it was absolute insurrection. But I'm saying he has to be judged by the people, and the people have to make the decision. And the Republican Party, I throw it right back on the Republicans.
So talk to me a little bit about the process for approving an amendment. Is the 14th Amendment, to get an amendment approved is a daunting task, right? It has to go through quite a bit. And so one could argue that the American people already weighed in when this amendment was approved and added to the Constitution.
I don't disagree with that, Kim. I think the 14th Amendment is crystal clear. I think Donald Trump committed insurrection. So let him be charged in a court with insurrection.
But that's not what the amendment says. The amendment doesn't say you have to be found guilty or you have to be this. But in Colorado, a judge did decide with due process, according to David Katz, right? They had a court case. Trump had lawyers in there. And so the judge decided insurrection was committed.
Yes, the Supreme Court essentially on a 4-3 vote made that determination. So let him be charged. Let Donald John Trump be charged with insurrection. By the way, you'll note in the charges brought by Mr. Smith, the words sedition or insurrection are not used.
Yeah.
So look, I don't like Donald Trump. Any man who talks about poisoning the blood of America, which is what he did yesterday, any man who, to my mind, used Hitlerian language, and he's not Hitler, let's be clear, but he used language like what was used in Nazi Germany, is unacceptable as a president. But you cannot make a martyr of Donald Trump. He has to be disqualified by the people. Now, somebody asked in the previous section about Nikki Haley. Where is Nikki Haley? Where is Governor DeSantis? Where are their denunciations of Donald Trump? I'll tell you, they don't want to denounce him because the Republican Party can't win without the Trump supporters.
That's right.
Just that simple. You can't alienate the base. But from the point of view of absolute courage and conviction, Donald Trump committed insurrection and the Republican Party has to repudiate him. Not a court, but the Republican Party itself. And that means the Republican leadership. Where is that deafening silence now? Look, I give a great deal of credit to Paul Ryan. Mm-hmm. Paul Ryan had the courage to stand up and say what he said the other day about Donald Trump. But that's not enough. It has to be more than that. And the more than that is what's going to happen in Iowa, in South Carolina, and in New Hampshire. New Hampshire and South Carolina in that order. Yeah. These states, these Republicans, good, honorable, decent people, have to understand what Donald Trump is. He will never accept defeat. But we can defeat him if Republicans stand up and just say no. And that has to happen.
I tend to feel a little differently than you, and that is when our democracy is in such peril and when it's at risk, when you have someone like a Trump who would come in and take it down and threaten to stay in office as he did last time, you use every tool you can to make sure that doesn't happen. You protect your country, you protect your democracy,
I agree, but
using the
tools, be a martyr, Kim?
Using the tools that we've been given.
But I don't want to be a martyr.
14th Amendment.
I don't want him to be a martyr.
Listen, I don't care if he's a martyr as long as he's not in the White House.
No,
good.
You understand. It's not just Donald Trump. It's all of the people who vote for him, all the people who believe in him, all of the people who support him. They have to be shown demonstrably that what Donald Trump did was unconscionable.
It doesn't matter. They're never going to believe it. They're a bunch of crazy people. They're not even going to believe if we all go out to the polls and vote overwhelmingly for President Biden. They're still not going to believe that that election is valid. They're not going to believe anything.
It's okay with me if they don't believe it. It's the American people who have to discredit Donald Trump.
No.
And I believe the Supreme Court, you ask the others, I'll tell you, the Supreme Court will not uphold the conclusion of the Colorado decision because their position will be that let the people decide. That's my decision too. You will not hear a nice word about Donald Trump from me. Never. And I hope he never sits in the White House. But if you're going to purge Donald Trump from the Republican Party, they have to do it themselves.
I saw an argument regarding the Supreme Court and whether or not that they will uphold the 14th Amendment in this case, that if they fail to do that, if they say that it's not applicable here, then they really put the entire Constitution in jeopardy.
No,
and everything's in jeopardy because
Kim,
this is so cut and dried.
With all due respect, I disagree with you. I want you to understand that what the court did was brilliant. The Supreme Court in Colorado said Donald Trump committed insurrection. Mm-hmm. That's clear. They're just saying he shouldn't be removed from the ballot. I want the Supreme Court of the United States to weigh in.
No, that the Colorado Supreme Court said he should be removed from the ballot.
I know. I don't agree with that, though. I'm telling you, he committed insurrection.
Right.
It shouldn't be a court judgment. Now, I also am very pragmatic politically. Why do the Republicans, who know what Donald Trump did, why are they silent? Because they know that for the Republican Party to win, they can't alienate the Trump base.
Yeah.
So let the Republicans know clearly and precisely that he committed insurrection. And I'm waiting for Mr. Smith's cases to come to court where what Donald Trump did, even if you don't use the term insurrection or sedition, Donald Trump tried to subvert an election. That's what we learned in Georgia. That's what we've learned in case after case. And I would remind you, Rudy Giuliani, who was the major advocate for the Donald Trump position, is now, well, it's a tragedy, an American tragedy. Let the tragedy unfold. Let Trump be denied the presidency, and I hope the nomination, by a Republican Party that comes to its senses. I understand that we use every tool in the box, but using the idea that a major contender, who by all polls is the majority choice of the Republican Party for the nomination of their party for the presidency, he has to be removed by them. Otherwise, I said it before, he becomes a martyr. The Republican Party will say, there's no justice in this country. Well, let Donald Trump be brought before the bar of justice. I say, let him be convicted, as he will be, of trying to subvert the election of 2020. Let that happen. And that's what people aren't talking about. The Smith case, the case that is coming up and will be heard in January. That's the critical case in my mind in dealing with Donald Trump. But let me just say personally, the fact that he talks about poisoning the blood of America, I would challenge anyone who is listening to the sound of my voice, unless you're a Native American, we are all children of immigrants, all of us, whether we are black or white, whether we came from Poland or Germany or European countries, or whether we came from China or Japan or anywhere in the world. This idea of poisoning the blood, I was shocked, Kim. Donald Trump said, I've never read Mein Kampf. Let me tell you, his first wife, look it up. It's right there on the internet. His first wife reported that Donald Trump had a book at his bedside called My New Order, published in 1942. I have a copy of that book. It recounts all of this blood-curdling stuff, including purity of blood and all the rest of that nonsense. And according to his first wife, he read that book thoroughly. Donald Trump is not only dishonest.
And here's a guy who doesn't even read, but he read that.
No. I know it's fun to say he doesn't read. He reads. I think he's a selective reader. Yeah. But let me be crystal clear about this. There should be indignation about a man who served in the presidency of the United States and who seeks to be president again, who would talk about poisoning the blood of America. Anyone who is the son or daughter of an immigrant should rise up and say, you have no business in the White House. You are a racist. You are a bigot. Yeah. And I think that has to be the indictment. I understand. We'll see what the Supreme Court does. I don't believe the Supreme Court will rule that he should be kept off the ballot. Let's
talk about the vile language that Trump has used of late. He invoked the term vermin. He talked about poisoning the blood of America with immigrants. And we do know from his now late and previous wife that he did have a copy of Mein Kampf by his bedside.
It's a book called My New Order, and it was seated by his bedside. I have a copy in my library. And it was not Mein Kampf, but it is a collection of Hitler's speeches going through 1942.
So having this book doesn't necessarily mean that you're some type of, Hitlerian disciple. It means that maybe you're a student of history. But then he comes and he brings this language. Do you think that he saw what happened with Hitler's rise to power and how people responded to that, and he's taking a page from Hitler and doing it on purpose?
It's a combination of Hitlerian rhetoric, but also Roy Cohn, who was the family lawyer and who was Joe McCarthy's right hand in the Senate, who said, never admit defeat, just keep blasting back. If they accuse you, you accuse them. If they say you're undemocratic, you accuse Joe Biden of being undemocratic. Yeah. I understand his thought and philosophy, but we have to understand. I don't speak here as a Democrat, as a Republican, as a liberal, as a conservative. I'm speaking to you as an American, as somebody who believes in the American system, my father was a refugee from Nazi Germany. Yeah. My great-grandparents were refugees who came here in the 1850s. And I understand what it means to flee oppression. I understand what it means to have a home, a sanctuary. And what Donald Trump has done is to violate the very principles of America and what we stand for. And there should be no mistake. I don't hold Donald Trump accountable per se. The Republican Party. Can you imagine a Republican Party, people like Ron DeSantis, like Nikki Haley, who are not denouncing Donald Trump for these rhetorical excesses? There's an old saying, Kim, if they say they're going to kill you, believe them. And I believe Donald Trump would kill the American democratic system if he could. Yeah. The fact that he can quote Vladimir Putin, the fact that he quotes Viktor Orban, the fact that the people he relies on are the dictators. He doesn't quote Jefferson. He doesn't quote Jackson. He doesn't quote Washington. He doesn't quote Lincoln. He chooses these kinds of petty dictators. And that is the danger. So I don't know what will happen on this case. The Supreme Court could decide virtually any way. But we have to understand, keep your eye on the ball. Preventing this man from being president of the United States of America must be the mission of everyone who loves our country.
There have been calls, mostly from Democrats, to pressure Justice Clarence Thomas to recuse himself from this key January 6th case, the case of whether or not Trump had presidential immunity and whether that applies in the current cases he faces. Senator Richard Blumenthal, who's a Democrat from Connecticut, wants Thomas to recuse himself. He says, especially because of Thomas's wife, Ginny, to challenge the 2020 election. And so he sent a letter to the Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts to take appropriate steps to ensure that Thomas recuses himself from this case. Do you see, or do you foresee Thomas stepping down, or do you think this is just kind of hot air and there's no way he's going to leave this one?
No, your key words were absolutely spot on. He has to recuse himself.
Yeah.
The most important lesson in that was Bill Rehnquist, who I knew pretty well. Bill Rehnquist was an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. He had worked in the Nixon Justice Department. He was nominated for the Supreme Court, placed on the court. When it came to the issue of the United States versus Richard Nixon, of the critical case in the Nixon case, he recused himself. Bill Ruckelshaus said, Justice Rehnquist said, I cannot vote on this because these are all my friends. Yeah. I believe Clarence Thomas should follow the precedent set by Chief Justice Rehnquist in recusing himself, but no one can force him to recuse himself. He must recuse himself. That's it. And will he? I doubt it. Clarence Thomas is one of the most unethical, dishonest people to ever sit on the United States Supreme Court.
It's an embarrassment.
Yeah, it is. And may I say that when he was nominated by George H.W. Bush, I did everything I could to oppose his nomination because I believed he was the wrong person at the wrong time. So who knows? You know what was sad about that? He was the second black man to be put on the Supreme Court. He succeeded to the seat that was held by one of the greatest justices in the history of our country, and who was a champion of civil rights. And he has succeeded. Thurgood Marshall was succeeded by somebody like Clarence Thomas. It's sad. It's a disgrace. But he does sit on the court. He does have a responsibility, and we will see what happens. By the way, I mentioned earlier in talking about Watergate, there were good Republicans, people of real stature, who understood what was happening and resigned their office. They wouldn't. Bill Ruckelshaus, who I mentioned earlier, and I mentioned him intentionally, and it's a good way to explain it. He left. He would not fire Archibald Cox.
Yeah.
And so I think this is something that we have to expect, that these leaders have to have conscience. I don't think Clarence Thomas will do the right thing. I hate to say it. He has no conscience in my mind. He feels, and I'm saying this for his benefit, that in defending Donald Trump, he is defending his vision of America and his wife's vision of America.
That's why their vision of America is how much money can I get for myself? That's their vision.
The thing is, take a look at his voting record. Take a look at the way he's done it. We need people of real conscience, people like Bill Rehnquist, people like Ruckelshaus, people like, frankly, Archibald Cox. We need people who have courage and conviction. And in the Republican Party, there may be a lot of profile, but there's very little courage.
Can I ask you about this case out of Arlington Cemetery? It's one of these cases where they're trying to remove a monument. It's a Confederate monument at Arlington Cemetery. For a moment, a judge blocked the monument from being removed. It's a century-old memorial there to Confederate soldiers. And now they're saying you can go ahead and remove this, that there's not going to be any desecration of graves. The grass won't be disturbed. And so the injunction is lifted and this monument is being taken down. I feel like there's a time and place for these monuments. And when you're at a place, at a cemetery or a place of history, that it's good to have them to remember. Do you think that they should take this monument down, or do you agree that or do you think that it should stand?
First of all, I'm a student of the Confederacy. One of my treasured volumes is Jefferson Davis, Rise and Fall of the Confederate Government. He was president of the Confederacy. And Alexander H. Stephens, the vice president of the Confederacy, who wrote a book on the Great Rebellion. I studied the Civil War. I have a whole library within my library on the Confederacy. I must tell you, I do not believe the monument should be taken down. It was placed there in part by Union people, by people who fought in the Civil War, not because they agreed with the Confederacy, but because we were trying to bind up the nation's wounds. We were trying to acknowledge that although they lost the war, they were still Americans. And one of the things that's very important to point out, ex-Confederates were reintegrated into America. Many of them served in the House and in the Senate. This question of revising history, whether it's erasing murals or removing monuments, I find offensive. I would rather, and it's interesting, when we were down in New Orleans, I took my older son Samuel to the Confederate Museum. It's a very small museum run by a private family. And we walked through it, and he had a chance to see it. And I explained to him, I brought you here not so you could agree with them, but so you could see them. You've got the picture up of Stone Mountain in Georgia. And people ask, should Stone Mountain be removed? Of course not. The fact that it portrays Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis and Stonewall Jackson, we have to learn from history. So I have no problem at all with a memorial for those who died in the Civil War. After all, it was the American Civil War.
Right.
It wasn't a foreign Civil War. And so, to be honest with you, and I know a lot of people listening to the sound of my voice will disagree with me, I believe it's very important to remember history.
Yep.
As I say, in my library, I have books on the Confederacy, not because I agreed with them, but because we have to understand them. Robert E. Lee was a great patriot. And do you know what he did after the war? He helped heal the nation's wounds. He traveled the country calling for reconciliation. And I would point out to you that one of the most remarkable stories was Ulysses S. Grant's wife and the wife of Jefferson Davis, who struck up a friendship. They were on opposite sides in the war, but they both wanted the nation to heal. It doesn't mean you defend the Confederacy, but it means you understand the Confederacy. Somebody asked me the same thing. How would I feel about a Hitler memorial? And of course, I'm against it, but I'm in favor of Holocaust memorials. I'm in favor of memorials that tell the story of Nazi Germany. I have no problem people understanding and reading what happened in those dark and terrible days. And in Germany, they teach about the Holocaust.
Yeah.
They teach about what Hitler was. I don't want to erase history. And many of you will recall I was very involved in the battle to preserve the murals at George Washington High School, which depict slavery and which many people wanted to see erased. Let me be Native Americans. There's a dead Indian in the mural, and people asked me about erasing them. I said, no. The man who created those murals, Arnautoff, was a Marxist. He created it in 1936. You know why he did it? To show what had really happened. You don't erase history. You learn from history. And so I am very much opposed to removing that kind of Confederate memorial, particularly from Arlington Cemetery. We were all Americans. That's what the Civil War was about, to preserve the nation. And as Abraham Lincoln said, to bind up the nation's wounds.
So
and that's very important.
There's a difference to me, though, between removing a name from a base, a Confederate soldier's name from a base, right? And this is why the removal of names from military bases is involved in why the Arlington statue is being removed as well. So this is a statue that was unveiled in 1914. It features this bronze woman crowned with olive leaves. She's standing on a 32-foot pedestal. She's holding a laurel wreath, a plow stalk, and a pruning hook. And an inscription says, "They have beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks." Um, there's some other kind
Which
of
is from the book, which
carvings.
is from the book of Isaiah.
There,
Just
yes,
so we
it's a,
know.
a biblical inscription. There's some other things on this. There's a statue that has a kind of a figure on the side of the statue that includes a black woman, an enslaved man following his owner to war. So Save Southern Heritage Florida filed multiple lawsuits trying to keep this in place. They say it was built to promote reconciliation between the North and the South. But others say no, this statue depicts a slave running after his master as he walks down the road. There's nothing reconciliatory about that. And this is being removed in conjunction with the review of army bases with Confederate names. So I feel like we need to really look at each individual thing that's being removed or being changed,
I agree.
because maybe it makes sense to take the names off of military bases. Maybe that's outlived its usefulness, and we don't
Maybe.
need to reconcile that anymore.
Let's take names off schools, right? Here in San Francisco, we filed a lawsuit because Paul Scott did it, and we won. They wanted to change the names of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. Why? They were racists. Well, you're right. There were racist tendencies, but it is absolutely ridiculous to try to erase it. I always tell people, read Abraham Lincoln, September 18th, 1858, the fourth debate between Lincoln and Douglas at Charleston, Illinois, in which Lincoln talks about the fact that white people are superior to black people. There shouldn't be intermarriage between white and black people, that black people shouldn't vote. Do you judge Lincoln by that statement, which all of you can Google? Or do you judge him by his record as president, the great emancipator, the man who brought about, frankly, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution? I'm not interested in selective history. I'm interested in learning history. This yesterday, we witnessed the funeral of Sandra Day O'Connor. Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman to serve on the Supreme Court. When she retired from the court, she created an organization to deal with civics, learning about America, because she said there is an abysmal ignorance about American history. It's absolutely true. It is astounding to me when people speak about erasing names or removing names like Lincoln or Washington or Jefferson. It is, they don't understand the full range of history. I applaud, by the way, that there is a Confederate museum in New Orleans. I want people to walk in and understand what that was. And as to the statues, well, I made the recommendation they take those statues and put them in a Confederate statuary hall, if you will, so people can see them. I just find it reprehensible that we try to erase history in this fashion. And by the way, the Confederate soldiers who died battling for their Confederacy, Robert E. Lee battled for Virginia. He considered himself a Virginian first. And did he have slaves? You bet he did. But was he the commandant at West Point? Was he one of the most brilliant American generals? Yes. And so, you have to weigh and balance these things. But if you're going to teach history, and if I had not been a radio talk show host, I would have liked to have been a teacher of history, because when you learn history, one other quick point. I believe in debating issues. Those of you who listened to me all those years on KGO, I invited people who disagreed with me. That's what made it interesting. So I was once invited to teach a speech class at a local middle school. And I wanted the kids to understand that you can have two sides to every issue. So what was the issue I chose? Resolved that chocolate cake should be eaten every day. Now, the idea was that chocolate cake was good for you. And I had half the class debating that it was, half the class debating that it wasn't. And then, in the middle of the debate, I clapped my hands and they flipped sides.
Yep.
Why? Because I want people to understand. For those of you who used to listen to me on KGO, some of you said, you're too nice to the Trump people. I wasn't nice to them. I wanted to give them enough rope to hang themselves. And I believe very strongly that airing issues, debating issues, really getting into the issues of the day is so important. And that's why when you ask me about the Confederacy, When you read Jefferson Davis, when you read Alexander Stephens, when you read Judah P. Benjamin, one of the great American statesmen, when you read these people who supported the Confederacy, you have to understand their logic was wrong. What they were defending was incomprehensible. I would have been in the Union cause from day one. But let me tell you, you talked about Trump at the very beginning. That's why I support our system. I believe that when you expose evil, and Donald Trump is evil, when you expose evil to the bright sunlight of freedom, then it is exposed, and you have to believe that people ultimately come to their senses. Certainly, we believe that in Germany. We believe it in Japan. That's what denazification was all about. And I would point out to you that Germany and Japan became model democracies after descending into the depths of dictatorship and, yes, idol worship. So
we're almost out of time, but I know, but I wanted to throw this one last issue at you, and that is that the House has adjourned for winter holiday. They won't be back till January 9th. They've left behind all of these issues for Congress to take up as soon as they come back: domestic issues, international issues, aid to Ukraine, border crisis, everything else. It's being called an absolute mess. Is there any way anything gets done even when they get back into session?
First of all, January 9th is Richard Nixon's birthday. Everybody should understand that and celebrate appropriately.
No.
It's a disgrace that Congress would take a recess when we face such remarkable issues. The fact that the Congress, the House of Representatives, is tied up in knots is because of the Republicans. And by the way, the new Speaker of the House of Representatives is beyond words. He's against everything we believe in, opposed to gay marriage, opposed to equal rights for women when it comes to abortion rights, the right of a woman to control her own body. The man is completely unfit ideologically to be Speaker of the House of Representatives. He was chosen as a compromise, but I just read an introduction to a book that he wrote. All I can tell you, Kim, is I'm ashamed when you consider the history of speakers of the House of Representatives, some of whom have been, I'll grant you, charlatans and fools, but most of them have been brilliant beyond words. And I always like to think of the House as the people's house, which is what it is. This House of Representatives, because of the Republicans, because of the so-called Freedom Caucus, is the antithesis. So I'm glad you raised it, Kim. Very few people think about the fact that Congress leaves the city of Washington in the midst of grave crises.
Yeah,
it's a shame.
It does. John Rothmann, thank you so much for being on the Mark Thompson Show. Your podcast is called Around the Political World with John Rothmann, and you can find that on all various podcast platforms. What is it, 10, 15 minutes every morning?
It is 10 minutes every morning, Monday through Friday. We have had 100,000 downloads.
So cool.
We continue to grow and expand. And my only regret, Kim, is I wish you and I, were back on the radio so there could be more interaction. But I welcome comments, which I receive regularly, and I appreciate everyone's support. And let me just indicate again, if you have a chance to re-listen to the first half hour of the Mark Thompson program dealing with what happened in Colorado, you should, and you should make sure your friends hear it. It was a spectacular demonstration of bringing together fine scholars. And you, Kim, were responsible for this particular moment in time.
That's pretty cool.
Thank you. And we're going to be together again for Nikki Maduro at 9:00 on Friday.
On Friday, so I'll see you then. All right.
Send me the link. Send me the link.
I'll send you the link.
All right, guys. Thank you.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.